Eric Seda. In November of 1989, police officers went about their daily tasks in New York's busy 13th precinct. A letter had arrived earlier that day from an unknown person. When it was opened, the officer reading it must have felt like he had been transported 20 years back in time to 1969. He read a message that warned that people were about to be killed. As you can imagine, police officers in New York probably get this type of correspondence often. In a city of nearly 8 million people, some crackpots were bound to be out there threatening to kill people. What shocked the officer, other than the threat, was a symbol that had become synonymous with America's most infamous killers, the Zodiac. Had the Zodiac relocated to the East Coast to start a new reign of terror after a 20-year hiatus? In the early 1990s, New York City was in a terrifying panic because a serial killer seemed to pick his victims randomly and stalk and kill them in the early morning hours. Even worse, the killer allegedly identified himself as the notorious Zodiac killer who had plagued Northern California 2 decades earlier. In his first letter to the authorities in 1989, written several months before the murderous rampage started, the author stated that he intended to kill one person for each of the 12 astrological signs. What the NYPD had on their hands was a copycat killer. This killer was seen as a copycat of the Zodiac and the Son of Sam. American serial killer David Richard Berkowitz, also known as the Son of Sam and a .44 caliber killer, admitted to 8 murders that started in New York City on July 29, 1976. Berkowitz tended to compose letters and use different symbols, much like Zodiac. Copycat killers commit crimes that resemble or imitate those of other notorious criminals, like serial killers. The psyche of copycat killers is complicated and varies from case to case. Still, several variables may be involved. A yearning for fame and recognition is one potential contributing element. Some people may become captivated by the media attention and popularity that infamous offenders enjoy. They might try to commit the same crimes to attract the same attention. A desire for control and power may also be a factor. Many serial killers attempt to exercise power and control over their victims. Some people might try to imitate this sense of control by conducting offenses similar to those committed by serial killers. Finally, some people's copying behavior may be influenced by a psychiatric condition or mental disease. These people may be suffering from illusions or have a warped perception of reality, which causes them to think they are related to or motivated by the initial offender. Heriberto or Eddie Seda is one such copycat. Seda, born in 1967, a resident of New York, was raised by his mother and half-sister, Gladys Chachi Reyes. He had been an excellent high school student until he brought a starting gun to class and was suspended. He left school rather than attend the required therapy meetings to be readmitted. Despite idolizing Ted Bundy, the serial killer, he professed to be profoundly religious and frequently went to church. He avoided relationships, kept to himself, and was unemployed. He earned money by placing open plastic bags in the return receptacles of payphones and vending machines, waiting a few days and retrieving the spare change. He studied literature on serial killers and periodicals about firearms and violence, such as Soldier of Fortune. In his spare time, Seda always wanted to join the U.S. Army's Special Operations Group, the Green Berets, and had prepared for the entry test by reading military strategy and equipment literature. He failed this test. Seda did not use narcotics, alcohol, or tobacco. However, he was intensely obsessed with the Bible, magic, and making his own firearms, known as zip guns. San Francisco's Zodiac killer was one notorious killer he admired and maintained scrapbooks of. Seda saw Zodiac as a servant of God. Over time, Seda's fixation with the Zodiac compelled him to plan a succession of copycat murders. He assembled a small arsenal of explosives and ammunition and fashioned his zip guns with interchangeable chambers to prevent the projectiles from being matched by ballistics. Similarly to the original Zodiac, he intended to abruptly stop killing. His first victim was identified as Mario Arocco on March 8, 1990. Arocco, a 49-year-old Scorpio, sustained a back wound after being shot. Seda wrapped the zip gun he used with a note saying, "This is the Zodiac," and left it at the crime scene. 3 weeks later, he shot and wounded German Montenegro, a Gemini, in the liver before checking his possessions for a passport. Seda shot 78-year-old Taurus Joe Pros on May 31st and left a note on his body. Pros's survival was anticipated, so the case was regarded as a robbery. Also, due to his extreme senility, he could not recall many details of the attack. The investigating detectives suspected they were dealing with a serial case by this point. On June 24th, Pros succumbed to his injuries. When letters from Seda listing the victims and their Zodiac signs were delivered to 60 Minutes and the New York Post, the authorities connected the shootings. They feared they were dealing with another son of Sam. His capture was referred to as Operation Watchdog. On June 19th, Seda shot Larry Parham, a homeless cancer, after taking his pocketbook to verify his identification. Parham survived. Another letter was then sent containing the original Zodiac symbol and a list of victims to the New York Post. At this point, the handwriting of the letters and the witness descriptions had established that Seda was not the original Zodiac, despite his continued claims to be so in his letters, and even taking credit for known Zodiac homicides. Seda then went on hiatus and did not return until 1992, when he shot Patricia Fonte, a Leo who was 39 years old, with a .22 zip gun. When she grabbed him during the attack, he panicked and stabbed her over 100 times. He did not attack anyone again until the following year, when he shot 3 people. Libra Jim Weber and Virgo Joseph Diacone survived the attacks, but unfortunately, Taurus Diane Ballard succumbed to her wounds. As with many serial killers, there have been times when police have apprehended them only not to connect the dots and realize who they had in custody. On March 10, 1994, Seda was apprehended for possessing a zip gun. The forensic lab did not examine it because it was erroneously labeled, and he was set free. On June 10th, he wounded another individual who survived, but the incident was unreported and the victim was never formally identified. The New York Post received another letter from Seda on August 1st. It included a list of the 1992 and 1993 victims, an odd totem pole code, and the phrase, "Sleep, my little dead, how we loathe them." Even though New York was again thrown into a state of hysteria, Seda ceased killing for unknown reasons. On June 18, 1996, he became enraged when his half-sister Gladys brought a male acquaintance to their apartment and spoke with him in her room. Seda grabbed one of his zip guns, fired into the wall, and then shot Gladys in the buttocks as she tried to run out the front door after she refused to tell the man to leave. Surviving a gunshot wound, she escaped to another apartment and called 911, leaving Seda with her companion in their apartment. 17 police officers positioned themselves in the street while Seda fired upon them from his apartment window. After several hours of resistance, he gave up and was taken into custody. What would have been a domestic disturbance and resisting arrest charge suddenly turned into a confession. When he wrote his confession for the shooting, he signed it with 3 sevens and the Zodiac symbol he had previously used to sign his correspondence. When a police officer noticed this, Seda became a suspect for being the Zodiac killer of New York. Despite the killer's claims that he could never be linked to the crimes because the improvised weapons lacked rifling, police could link Seda to the attacks using tool mark evidence. In addition to fingerprint evidence, handwriting analysis uncovered a striking similarity between Seda's statement and the anonymous letters. The most incriminating evidence was that police discovered Seda's DNA on one of the stamps used to mail a letter to the police. Seda's modus operandi was to fire at random people with improvised 9mm or .22 caliber zip guns. During his initial shooting sprees, he employed blitz attacks. However, he would later approach his victims under false pretenses. His objective was to murder 12 people, one for each zodiac sign. To determine the victims' dates of birth, he would rummage through their personal effects in search of a form of identification to see which zodiac sign they fell under. Eddie Seda was found guilty of 3 counts of murder and 9 counts of attempted murder in 2 separate Queens and Brooklyn trials in June 1998 and sentenced to 235 years in prison. The earliest parole date for Seda is not until December 2231. Eddie Seda was incarcerated for many years at the notorious Attica prison in Wyoming County, New York, where he married a fellow transgender inmate, Cynthia China Blast. He spent his time there reading the Bible, creating origami, and watching hunting programs. Seda is currently incarcerated at the Clinton Correctional Facility in Clinton County, New York, a maximum security prison.